We would like to welcome our guest speaker, Rachel Bailey. Rachel is a parenting specialist that has helped hundreds of parents bring out the best in their children. In addition to her master's degree in clinical psychology, she has been an ADHD coach, an in-home mentor, a therapist, and a teacher of positive parenting techniques. Over the past decade, she has taught hundreds of parents and children tools for improving behavior, motivation, resilience, and self-esteem. Today, she is here to share with us why children have such big emotions, how to reduce behavior intensity, and how to foster resilience in children. In her presentation entitled Tame the Drama, Addressing Big Emotions in Your Family. At the end of the presentation, Rachel will answer questions posed by the audience. You may submit a question at any point in the presentation by using the chat feature in Zoom. Welcome, Ms. Rachel Bailey.
Thank you so much. And I know this has been such a lot of effort to put together. So I appreciate those of you who did organize this event and those of you who are here live. I'm very excited to talk to you about big emotions and specifically fostering resilience in kids with big emotions in a way that improves their self-esteem. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides and jump in to what I'm going to be talking about today. And I will tell you as I am jumping in that I am pretty interactive in these presentations. So those of you who are here live, I'm going to be asking some questions and I would love for you to answer them. It's just more interesting if you're talking back to me and I'm talking to you than for me to just talk at you for an hour. So we will also have time, by the way, as you know, for questions at the end. So what I'm really going to talk about today is reducing the drama in your home if you are raising a child with big emotions, and I will define what I mean by that. But what I'm going to do is teach you how to foster resilience in a way that not only helps them manage their emotions, but also helps increase their confidence. And I'm going to stress in a couple of minutes why this is so incredibly important. So you already heard a little bit about my background, but I will just add a couple of things. First of all, I have two kids. My kids are 10 and 13, so in 4th and 7th grade. And both of my kids feel things strongly. It looks a little bit different in each of my kids. One of my children sort of turns her emotions out, one holds them in. I am also what's called a highly sensitive person. So I have lots of emotions. So there are lots of emotions in my home, you can imagine. A lot of the strategies that I'm going to teach you, we use in our home as well. At this point, I've worked with actually thousands of families, so it's probably an old explanation of my background, but you heard a little bit about my clinical background and really what I've always been interested in. I've been in the field of psychology for about 20 years now or so. I've always been interested in the concepts of resilience and self-esteem. And I think this happened pretty early on because I was working initially with kids and teens. I don't work with them anymore. I work with parents. But initially I worked with kids and teens. I was an ADHD coach, a therapist, and I realized that so many of the kids that I was working with, what was underlying everything. So I worked with kids with anxiety and depression and self-harm behavior. But what I noticed was that almost every child struggled with resilience and with self-esteem. So that's always been my area of clinical interest for the past 20 years or so. And I really think about these concepts in terms of communication between parents and children and relationships. And I really do. My ultimate goal is to raise more resilient kids and who have healthy self-esteem, but to bring more peace to our homes. So I will tell you that I work with parents in lots of ways. I do have a private practice. And again, I don't support kids and teens anymore. A lot of people ask me about that. I don't do that anymore. What I do is support parents of kids and teens with big emotions. So when I say big emotions, I basically mean kids who are anxious, kids who are sensitive, kids who have a hard time when things don't go their way. Usually when I get interviewed, because I get interviewed a lot about raising kids with big emotions, and the interviewer will say, how do I know if my child has big emotions? If you have a child with big emotions, you probably know. So I could explain it to you, but usually you know. So I'm going to wrap up a little bit about me, but what I want to do is start interacting with you. And if you don't mind, if you're here live, put in the chat the ages of your kids as I wrap up a little bit more information about me. What are the ages of your children? So just know I've gotten really good at reading the comments and looking at Zoom. I might not respond to all the comments that I see, but I am reading them. So keep them coming. I'm seeing them starting to come in. Excellent. So we have a lot of elementary school, some adolescents, a couple of teenagers. Got it. Excellent. Thank you for putting that in. I'll be asking you more questions, so I really appreciate that. So again, I work with kids with big emotions. I am a speaker. I do these presentations all the time for companies and schools, doctors' offices, organizations. I also have a podcast. So I see some older kids as well. I have a podcast called Your Parenting Long Game. And hopefully I am what is called, a lot of people call me a life changer, because I do teach a specific method for raising kids with big emotions. All right, so that's enough about me. What I want to do is, last thing I do want to say is that I am incredibly grateful to be able to talk to you about this topic today, about big emotions, and specifically about how to support our kids with big emotions in a way that helps them feel good about themselves. Because what I found, like I said before, is that almost every child I know with big emotions or adolescent really struggles with low self-esteem. So that's what I'm really going to talk about a lot today, what you can do about that to foster resilience. So let me just give you a couple of quick definitions. And I will start with something I already mentioned. What do I mean by children with big emotions? That is children who are anxious, sensitive, have a hard time when things don't go their way. Some people call this being strong-willed, but really you'll hear this strong-willed behavior is just an unhealthy coping mechanism for a child who feels things really strongly. So let me also define resilience. Resilience is, by the definition I'm going to use in this presentation, the ability to experience and move beyond challenges in a healthy way. So we're all going to face challenges, but a lot of people either struggle in the moment with challenges, or maybe they get through it by grinning and bearing in the moment, but then after the challenge, there's some sort of residual effect. So we want to teach our kids to be able to handle the fact that they're not always going to be able to get their way, that there's going to be sadness, that homework is sometimes difficult, that they're going to have to put away their clothes even when they don't feel like it. We have to teach them to handle those things in a healthy way. And lastly, I do want to talk about self-esteem as our perception of ourselves, and specifically our perception of our worthiness and our capability. It's really important that when we are raising kids with big emotions, that we're aware that our responses to them, especially as we're trying to help them with their big emotions, with their anxiety, with their, maybe big reactions that seem disproportionate, we do this in a way that helps them feel worthy and helps them feel capable. This is where a lot of kids with big emotions struggle. So I just wanted you to have these definitions. And I just want to mention the relationship between these three. And as I do, I'm going to ask a lot of yes, no questions. And just remember, in Zoom, you probably know this, we're all familiar. You can send me a direct message. If you don't want your name associated with your answer, just send me a direct message, because again, it's more interesting for you if you interact with me. So if you don't want to answer this question to everyone, just send it directly to me. But I want to know if you see this in your child. If you are, well, first of all, say yes if you feel like by my definition, you're raising a child with big emotions. I'm kind of assuming you are. If you're in this session, you chose to be here. I see some yes with capital letters, exclamation points. Yeah, usually you know, right? You just know. Okay. So I will hold off my second question because I know the answer to that one is still coming. So let me know if you are raising a child with big emotions as I defined it. And what I will say is that children with big emotions are at such a higher risk for low self-esteem. And this is an issue because honestly, low self-esteem is associated with some of the things that we're really worried about. Low self-esteem is associated with kids who, give into peer pressure, kids who are more unhappy, they're more prone to depression and other mental health issues. On the other hand, high self-esteem, healthy self-esteem, I should say, is more associated with the things that we want for our kids, making healthy choices for themselves, having healthy relationships. So it's really important that kids have healthy self-esteem, yet kids with big emotions are at a much higher risk for low self-esteem. And I will just ask my next question because I think everybody has answered this one. Have you noticed your child with big emotions maybe doesn't feel so great about themselves? Have you noticed that maybe they say mean things about themselves? They become really irritable if you ask them to do something. They are not very confident. They don't want to try new things. Maybe they do things because other people want them to, but they don't want to. Or if you have a strong-willed child, they get really upset when things don't go their way. These are all signs that your child may be struggling. Seeing some more exclamation points, yes and yes. Yeah, it's very, very common. What I will say is that I want to help with this, and I'm going to be really practical about this, because usually when we see kids with big emotions, we worry about their big emotions. We want them to be resilient, but often we are fostering resilience at the expense of their self-esteem. Yeah, irritable and doesn't want to do new things, strong-willed, but strong confidence, So that's great. If it is a true healthy confidence, I love to see that. It's not as common. Sometimes too, we have kids who are overly confident, which isn't real. It's kind of a facade. But what you're saying is strong, healthy confidence. That's what I love to hear. That's great news. All right, so let's talk about what we do about all this. I'm going to give you some action steps as we get later into the presentation. But first, I want to explain, in order to really understand and support your child with big emotions and big reactions, I call them big reactions because that's kind of what we see. Emotions are what our kids are feeling. They're feeling things strongly. We see on the outside the big reactions. And I do want to emphasize, big reactions are not always loud. So I have a daughter who has big feelings, and she's not a loud child. She's more sensitive, but she still feels things strongly. So she gets really upset if perhaps we criticize, or even we don't criticize, but we say something like, did you put your dishes away? She's really hard on herself. She feels things strongly, but she turns it in more. She also gets upset if animals get hurt, or if people have a hard time. She feels it really strongly. So big reactions are not always loud and turn outward. I just want you to know that. But when you see a big reaction, I'm going to start to tell you the cause. And that's very, very simple. This is one of the big takeaways from today. Big reactions happen simply when someone's yuck is bigger than their coping skills. Of course, I'm going to define what I mean by yuck. But a big takeaway from today, big reactions simply mean that someone's yuck is bigger than their coping skills. We have a lot of reactions to our kids' reactions. But when we stop seeing them as a problem and just say, oh, my child has a lot of yuck and they don't have a lot of coping skills, that's all it is. So what do I mean by yuck? Yuck is a term I just mean I use to describe any type of discomfort. So someone could be hungry or tired or disappointed or overwhelmed, stressed. We all probably can relate to the phrase yuck because we have a lot of yuck a lot of the time. It doesn't matter what discomfort it is. Our brain actually doesn't really differentiate. Our brain just senses discomfort and something happens. We'll talk about in a moment. So basically, when someone has a lot of discomfort or yuck and they don't have the skills to handle that level of yuck, you're going to see a big reaction. And in all of my programs, I always teach this seesaw right here that you see. If you think about the relationship between yuck and coping skills, when someone's yuck is higher than their coping skills, you see a big reaction, and that's all it is. And I actually want you all to experience this for a moment. So I'm going to show you why you might even have a big reaction by giving you a couple of quick scenarios. All right, so let's imagine you have to do your taxes. Now, your taxes might create yuck in you just because they're taxes and they're boring and maybe they bring up some money issues, whatever. So let's say you're doing your taxes and they're really hard and they're really boring, but you have pretty good coping skills. So you know that when you're doing your taxes, if you take a break every once in a while, you're going to feel better. You know, if you break your taxes up so you're doing them over a few days, you're going to be fine. You know, if you call a friend and you laugh at how annoying the taxes are, you're going to be fine. So if you're doing your taxes and you have these really good coping skills, yes, you have a little bit of yuck, but your coping skills are higher than your yuck. So it's not that big of a deal. Even though the taxes cause yuck, not that big of a deal. But now what I want you to experience is what a lot of kids experience, which is where that seesaw flips, where your yuck is higher than your coping skills. And I do want you to know that kids with big emotions are neurologically wired to feel yuck more strongly and to notice it more easily. So I'm going to repeat that at the end, because if you are not someone with big emotions, you're still going to experience a big reaction in this scenario. But I will tell you, your child will experience an even bigger reaction. All right, so still doing your taxes, but now I'm going to increase your yuck. And even though you have those coping skills, you know, breaking things up is helpful. You know that calling a friend is helpful. You know those things. You have those coping skills. Now imagine you're doing your taxes, and I'm going to increase your yuck a little bit. You're doing your taxes and you just sold a house. And so now you realize this year your taxes are a little bit different and you don't know how to do what you have to do. You have no idea how to do the part about selling a house. There are a couple of other things that have happened and you don't know how to do your taxes. So you're like, oh, wait, new section. I don't know how to do this. And you're trying to do your taxes. And what you're realizing as you're kind of pushing through is that you owe more money than you thought. You had calculated that you're going to owe this amount of money, but you owe more money. And you're realizing, oh my gosh, I owe more money. And am I doing this wrong? I don't even know what am I doing. And is the IRS going to call me? And am I going to get audited? And if I get audited, do I have to hire an accountant for that? And you are just feeling one stressor after the other, after the other. And what you're thinking in that moment is, breaking this into small pieces is not going to help. I still don't know how to do my taxes. Taking this over a few days is not going to help. I still don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to deal with the fact that I'm going to owe more money. Calling a friend is not going to help because my friend's not going to get it. My friend and I laughed last year about how easy the taxes were. So that's not going to make me feel better. So now at this point, your skills are not higher than your yuck. Okay, so you're in this space, you have a lot of yuck, your coping skills are not helping, and your spouse or friend comes in the room and says to you, "You're not done with the taxes yet?" How's your reaction going to be? So I'm going to ask you low, medium, or high. High meaning you probably have a negative yuck reaction. What's your reaction like in this moment when someone says, "You don't have your taxes done yet," when your yuck is higher than your coping skills? Low, medium, or high? What is your reaction going to be? Yeah. I mean, this is an obvious question, yet I'd probably snap and say something rude. Yeah. High coming up, punching, love it. Yeah. And remember, as you're typing, I'm just going to reiterate this. Your child, if they have big emotions, or you, if you have big emotions, they're wired to feel yuck more quickly and feel it more strongly. They're not making it up. They actually do feel it. We've studied the kids who feel things strongly, and it's true. Okay, so we're going to have a lot of yuck. Now I'm going to add high but sarcastic. Yeah. Keep those answers coming. I want you to respond, but I want to add a little dose of judgment. So your friend or your spouse comes in and they say, "You're not done yet." And you get upset, you have this high reaction, and then they judge your reaction and they say, "Why are you so upset? I'm just asking." This is a situation most of our kids are in. They have a lot of yuck. They don't have a lot of coping skills. And what we do is we judge their reaction. We get frustrated they haven't done what we want them to do, and then we judge their reaction. Someone said, "Oh, I'm out." Exactly. Yet this is what our kids go through on a regular basis. Imagine why they don't feel so good about themselves. Imagine why they don't feel so good about us. This is what's happening for them. So I wanted you to experience this because obviously I'm going to help you get around this, but I'm going to first talk about what we usually do in situations where our kids are not really handling something efficiently, when they're not being resilient. So I'm going to switch. I'll get you out of this uncomfortable situation. And I'm going to switch now to a child's perspective. And let's say your child gets really upset. They got into an argument with a friend and they're really, really upset. And you're thinking, it's just an argument. It happens all the time. You know, we all argue with our friends. They need to learn how to deal with this. They need to learn how to handle this because this is life. So imagine I know you have a question. Questions we'll definitely do at the end. I think you can submit those in the Q&A. We will get to those, just so you know. What happened, and I will answer any question about yuck for sure, or skills. What happens when our child is really upset about something and we think that they're disproportionately upset is we worry about them. We think, "Oh my gosh," I call this future thinking. If we can't get them to be more resilient, they won't be able to handle life. They won't have any friends. They'll be on our couch when they're 30 years old, playing video games and eating pizza. I feel like all of us go there at some point. Our kids are 30 years old, eating pizza, sitting on our couch. That's what we do when we think our kids are not resilient. So let me give you go back to this example of your child just is really upset because their friend is mad at them. And you're thinking, not a big deal. And you are trying to foster resilience because you're worried about your child. So I want you to say yes. Again, send these messages to me privately if you don't want to acknowledge this, although you'll see that everybody's saying yes to this. If you say to them when your child is really upset, some variation of this, you can't get so upset. It's not a big deal. Your friend is just upset with you. It happens. So type yes if you usually say some variation of, "Don't get so upset." I'm seeing some of the private yeses, some of the public yeses coming through. Yeah, this is normal. This is definitely what our parents said to us, right? This is totally what our parents said to us. And I want you sometimes is a very honest answer. It probably depends on your level of yuck, by the way, how you respond. And I do entire workshops on how our level of yuck determines our response. All right, so I'm not saying any of this to make anyone feel bad, but I want you to know how this impacts a child's self-esteem. And come on, if you do this every once in a while, you're not doing damage to your child. It's if this happens on a regular basis. This is where kids end up. So what happens is our child who does feel things strongly is thinking, "But wait, I am upset. So now, should I not trust my feelings? Like, I am upset and they're telling me not to be upset. What's going on inside of me? Obviously, I can't trust myself." And what happens to their self-esteem And if you recall, what I said self-esteem is a belief in our worthiness and a belief in our capability. So now when you're saying you can't get so upset and they're thinking, but wait, I am upset. Should I not trust myself? They don't feel worthy of acceptance as they are because they're basically being told you're feeling this way, change. And they don't feel capable because they don't know how to feel differently. They're being told don't feel this way, but they don't know how to snap out of it. So they're questioning their worth. They're questioning their capability. So next example, we say to kids, take deep breaths, which, oh my gosh, such good intentions, right? Like we want to help our kids. We want to get them to feel better. We know deep breaths should work. For a lot of kids, and I do, again, entire workshops on what should they use if deep breaths don't work. But for a lot of kids, deep breaths just aren't helpful for them. And it's a lot of reasons. Some of it's in their head, but some of it truly doesn't help. But for those it doesn't help, they're thinking, wait a second, deep breaths aren't working. I'm still upset. And now I'm disappointing my mom or my dad or grandma or grandpa. I'll answer those questions. Definitely get those questions to me at the end because I just don't want to pause. I don't have that much time today. That's a great question. Let me answer it because it's so relevant. The question is, I say the feeling is fine, but the behavior is not. You're going to hear this. It's okay to say that, but they don't know how to change their behavior. So what you're doing again is they're saying, okay, this behavior is wrong, but I don't know how to change it. That's the problem with that. It's the only problem with that. So if they don't know how to change it, again, very similar to they're telling me to take deep breaths and now I can't, so they're upset with me. So hopefully that answers that question. That was a quick one, so I could do that one. And what we're doing again is we're making them question their worth. But wait a second, I can't take deep breaths. I'm told that deep breaths should work. I've learned this at school. My mom or dad or caregiver is telling me this. Now I'm disappointing them and I can't do anything different. All right, last one. And again, this isn't meant to make anyone feel bad because believe me, some of these things would absolutely come out of my mouth if I didn't do this for a living. It's very much what we learned. Last one is don't be so dramatic. Why are you so dramatic? No one's going to want to be around you if you're dramatic. So if your friend's mad at you and this is how you react, no wonder. You can't be so dramatic. And again, we have such good intentions. A lot of these responses, I'll be honest, don't come from our values. Most of us know intellectually these are not great things to say, but they come from our yuck. They come from our fear. They come from our worry that if we don't teach kids these skills, they're never going to be able to handle life. So when we say, don't be so dramatic, people that will affect the people around you, they start to think, what's wrong with me? Whatever's wrong with me is going to affect my relationships. This is what they're hearing. You say things that are so well-intentioned. We do. I'm not going to say just you. And yet it affects our kids' self-esteem. And we're not aware of this. And it's so important to me that we become aware of this because so many kids that I saw and so many teens that I saw felt really bad about themselves. And it wasn't intentional on parents' part. This is actually why I shifted to working with kids and teens to working with parents. Because I was like, you know what? We don't know this stuff. We don't know that we're doing unintentional harm. And I want everyone to know. It's also not such a difficult fix. It's the other reason I love doing what I do because it's not that hard to fix it. Now, I do want you to hear this last piece of what a former client said to me. This was a huge aha moment. And I just want you to hear this because obviously I got their permission to share this. And I think it's a really big eye opener for most of us as parents. And that is, this client said to me, this is when I was a therapist, so many years ago now, I know my parents love me, but they're only nice to me and they only seem to like me when I feel or act the way I want them to. They're only nice to me when I feel or act the way I want them to. We're basically teaching them that we're nicest to them when they're doing what we want. And then this child went on to say, and sometimes I just don't know how to feel or be the way they want me to. So when we are only nice to our kids, when they're, when they're flexible, when they're going with the flow, when they're nice to their brother or sister, when we're nice, they do start to question their worth and that it's not unconditional. It's conditional of them being a certain way and that affects their self-esteem. So now that I've painted this really grim picture, I'm going to tell you what to do. And it's really, again, pretty simple what we do to foster resilience and healthy self-esteem. It's not necessarily easy, but it is simple. All right, so remember I said this seesaw, when yuck is bigger than their skills, we see big reactions. So we're going to shift, and this is what I teach in all of my programs. instead of judging our kids and saying, why are you acting like that? Or don't be so upset, or you're having such a big emotion, or why are you reacting like that? Or these are the kids, I have a daughter who will whine and complain every time I ask her to do anything. I ask her to put her dish away. Oh, take a shower. Oh my God. That's a big emotions child. They will whine and complain. In fact, let's ask another yes, no question. Do you have a child who, no matter what you ask them to do, if they don't want to do it, even though they know they have to do it, say yes if they will whine and complain anyway? I want to hear this. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I see people were talking. I didn't mean to interrupt that conversation. Sorry about that. So instead of judging that reaction, which is what we do, instead of advising them, take deep breaths or change your behavior, or your feelings are okay, but your behavior is not. Instead of judging and advising, you have two of them. Yeah, that's common to have more than one in a house. Instead of judging and advising, what we're going to do is meet their needs, help them understand themselves, and we're going to teach them how to change their behavior. We're going to teach them how to do something different. So we're shifting from judgment and advising, which is what we love to do. We love to judge. We love to tell our kids what to do. But instead of doing that, we actually give our kids what they need. I call this long game parenting. We shift from what feels good in the moment, which is what I call Band-Aid parenting, to long game parenting, where we meet their needs and we teach them. So what I'm going to do for the rest of today is I'm going to give you action steps. And again, we should have time for questions at the end as well. But I want to just give you action and things to do for the rest of today. So what I'm going to teach you how to do is reduce yuck. And we're really actually reducing unnecessary yuck. We're not making our kids feel good all the time. That would actually not make them more resilient. We want to reduce the yuck, and we want to increase their skills. So we don't just say, take deep breaths. We actually teach them how they can feel better when they're in yuck. All right, so let's jump into this. Basically, what it looks like when I'm done with them, when I'm done with the family, is that our kids respect themselves and their emotions, but they don't let their emotions control them. As a highly sensitive person, I've had to learn to do this. And I'm not successful all the time, but 80% of the time, I understand my emotions and I don't let my emotions control me. And we can get all of our kids to that point. All right, so let's start with reducing unnecessary yuck. This is not about making kids feel good all the time. We're reducing unnecessary yuck. And the way we do that is we do what I call making deposits. And we're making deposits into needs, not wants. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. So let's talk about this concept of making deposits. First, what you need to know is that we cannot be resilient when our needs are not met. So we want our kids, when a friend is mad at them, when we tell them to do their homework, when someone tells them to put their dishes away, we want them to be able to handle that in a mature way. We want them to be able to say, okay, I'll do it. Or my friend is mad at me, but I'll be okay. We want them to be able to do this, but we cannot, as humans, be resilient when our needs are not met. We are a survival-based species. And so our brain is constantly looking to make sure our needs are met. And if they're not met, our brain will focus on meeting the need first over being resilient and being mature and doing the right thing. If anyone took Psych 101, you probably learned, or maybe you just have heard this, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically what that says is our needs need to be met first, and then we can do all the other things like being resilient. So just know we can't be resilient when our needs are not met. So what we need to do is give our kids what they need, not what they want. So when I introduce this concept of deposits, a lot of parents will say to me, but I do, take them places and I do hear what they say. And if they really want me to let them stay up for 10 more minutes, I let them stay up. Or if they just ask to get off their game, they're in the middle of their game and they say, can I have 2 more minutes? I give them 2 more minutes. These are all giving them what they want. Giving them what they want is what feels good for them in that moment. Giving them what they want is buying them things, taking them places, being a little flexible with our boundaries. That's giving them what they want. And ultimately, that actually leads to not only less resilience, but it leads to entitlement and spoiled kids. Now, is it okay to give your kids what they want sometimes? Of course, I'm not saying be mean and don't take them places or buy them things, but this is not what I mean by making deposits. Here's what I mean by making deposits. So basically, we have certain emotional needs. And I'm going to tell you what they are in a moment. There are 5 of them that I'm always looking for as a clinician. And when these needs are, basically think of them like bank accounts. We can make withdrawals and we can make deposits into these needs. And when these needs accounts are, low, meaning, there have been more withdrawals than deposits, then someone's going to be in yuck, and they're not going to be very resilient, especially if their skills are not very high. So when I was giving you, when you were doing your taxes and I was giving you all those stressors, I was basically withdrawing from your needs accounts. So when we have more withdrawals and deposits, we're going to be in yuck. And that's when a child is going to focus more on the missing need. So here's a quick example of what I mean by this. Let's say your child's supposed to study, but their friends are all talking. Maybe they're talking on the phone. Maybe your child has a phone and they're all talking. Or maybe if you have a younger child, they're just kind of doing something, they want to be doing something fun. Their brother and sister are doing something and they want to join them. So if your child has to study for a test, you want them to say, no, I'm not going to play with you. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to study. But they also have a really strong need for connection. And what the brain is going to say is, oh, if I disconnect from my friends, that's going to be more of an issue than if I don't study for the test. So again, the brain is focused on what's the bigger need right now? What will I miss out on if I do this thing? So I just want you to kind of get an example of the brain's going to meet needs before doing the hard thing. But if we deposit into wants, we're going to have low resilience and entitlement. I mentioned that. So what we need to do is to deposit into these needs accounts. And this is the foundation for resilience and healthy self-esteem. We have to make sure their needs are met. So we're not judging them when our kids are being mean to someone or they're having a big reaction. We're saying, which of these needs is not met? Why are they having that big reaction? When you were doing your taxes, I basically did a withdrawal from your sense of capability. So if someone came in and saw that you were struggling, instead of getting mad at you for your reaction, if they said, why is this person having this reaction? Oh, they're doing their taxes and they're really hard. So we're understanding what's going on. All right. So I want to tell you what these 5 emotional needs are. You don't need to be able to differentiate right now. Don't worry about that. So I'm not going to spend a long time helping you figure out, well, is it this one or this one? But what I will say is that I want you to think of, as I'm talking about these needs, I want you to think of a child who does have big emotions or who maybe doesn't handle their yuck very well. And I'm going to ask you, as I go through these 5, to think about how many accounts do you think probably have more withdrawals than deposits? I'll tell you what I mean, examples of withdrawals. But what I will tell you is most kids have at least one area. More likely 2, 3, 4, or 5 of these needs have more withdrawals than deposits. So just imagine one person in your head, or you'll get confused. Whoever you want, could be an adult too, it doesn't matter. It could be you, doesn't matter who it is. Imagine someone who's struggling a little bit. And I want you to tell me how many of these accounts are low, meaning more withdrawals than deposits. All right, first one is the need. Whoops, there should only be one there. Hold on, I think, yeah. I'll talk about both. That was a mistake on my slide. First is connection. This is the need to know that we belong, the need to feel part of a group. So if you have a child who struggles with fitting in, a child who feels like they don't get a lot of attention, and this is their perception, it's not necessarily the truth. A child who feels like they're a black sheep in the family or a black sheep in a group, those are examples of withdrawals. The next is the need for significance. Significance, it goes beyond knowing I belong, but I also need to matter. And a lot of people think this one is a luxury. It would be nice to know that I matter. It's not a luxury. In fact, the example I want you to think about for this one is if you're driving along and someone cuts you off on the road, you're going to get really mad. They cut you off, you're immediately going to get angry and go into fight or flight, because when they cut you off, they're basically saying, I matter more than you do. And the brain sees that as a threat. It goes back to our caveman days where if we didn't matter, we probably wouldn't have survived. So we need to know we matter. So examples of withdrawals, very simply, are where we say to our kids, I know you're in the middle of playing the video game, but it's time to come to the dinner table. Basically saying your agenda doesn't matter as much as mine. And believe me, I say these things to my kids too. Our goal is not to prevent withdrawals. It's to make sure we're making more deposits than withdrawals. Just like a bank account, we don't not make withdrawals. We do, we just also make deposits. All right, so significance is the next. So think about, is the person you're thinking about, are they low in this one, more withdrawals? The next is capability. Capability is the need to know that I can do it. I really withdrew from this one in the taxes example. I basically said, you don't know how to do this. You don't have someone you can call to ask. Those are all withdrawals. So if you have a child who feels like they struggle in school, they struggle with peer relationships, they struggle with a sibling, but they don't know how to handle it, those are withdrawals. Next is control. And honestly, control being, I have a say in how things go, I have some power. As parents, we need to withdraw from their need for control. That's what we do as parents. We set limits, we set boundaries. That's one of my areas of expertise. I talk about that all the time. But it's not we're not trying to prevent the withdrawals. We have to make sure they have enough deposits. Otherwise, they will try to get control in unhealthy ways. A lot of kids with big emotions, they're negotiating, they're blaming, things like that. That's their way to get control back. That's what they're doing. And lastly is the need for security. So as I'm describing security, you can start to type how many, number 1 through 5, of these need accounts do you think have more withdrawals than deposits? So you can start typing that. The last need is the need for security, which is the need to know I'm going to be okay. And a lot of kids with anxiety especially have a lot of situations where they don't feel like they're going to be okay. Yeah, I see 3, 5. I love people are sending me private messages. Keep doing that. It's no problem for me whatsoever. See some 4s. What I'm seeing so far is that the numbers are pretty high, 3 to 4. Yeah, this is what's happening. So this is where a child in this much in Yuck is not going to be able to be resilient. We can't ask them to be resilient until we actually address their Yuck. So keep those numbers coming if you're still typing. What I do want to do is teach you what I mean by deposits. This is where we get to the good stuff. So I actually have lists of hundreds of deposits, and they don't take very long. They're pretty simple, but they have a huge impact. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples right now. So I'm glad the numbers are still coming. Please keep typing if you're typing. But I want to give you some examples of what I mean by significance. So, or by any of these, but here's a deposit into significance. One really simple way to do this that you can start doing today is to see your child's point of view, even or especially when you don't agree with it. So let's say your son is mean to your daughter. Our instinct is to say, you can't treat her like that. But if you go back later and say, you know, that may not have been handled the best way, but I see why you got so upset. You were upset with your sister because she got into your space or she walked into your room for the 5th time that day. Whenever we get into someone's world and see them, that is an example of a deposit. This does not take very long, but it has a huge impact. And I will tell you, one of the biggest difficulties or challenges for kids with big emotions is that they do not feel understood. So if you can start to understand your child, this is a huge deposit. Again, very easy, very simple. All the deposits that I suggest take like a minute or less. They're very simple things, but I call them like the shoelaces. The more you do, the tighter you pull and the closer you get. You know how you pull shoelaces tighter and the sides of the shoe get closer? These are like the shoelaces. We make these simple deposits and our relationship gets closer and they feel better. Another example of a deposit, this is also another easy one you can do today, is to defer to your child as an expert. We're often telling them what to do and we're giving them that advice. But if you actually say to them, you know, what you play soccer. My friend's daughter is also playing soccer. Can you give me some tips? Can you give me some advice? That is deferring to them as an expert. It's a huge deposit. So that's really what I want you to know about Yuck, is that if we want to, I have lots of ways to reduce Yuck, but one of the simplest ways is to make those deposits to reduce Yuck. And now I'm going to shift for the next few minutes to teaching skills. This is a really big topic. I have an entire 6-week class on this. So I'm going to give you an overview of teaching skills. And I want to do this so that I have at least 10 minutes left for questions. So I'm going to go through this just at a very high level. And I want you to just ask me questions at the end. All right. So the first thing we need to do if you want to teach your child how to handle discomfort or Yuck is to understand what I call the Yuck curve. Because if you don't understand the Yuck curve and the Yuck factor, you're going to see that as humans, we usually don't handle discomfort very well. What usually happens when we're in discomfort, and let me actually back up. When we're not in discomfort, when we feel good, we are more resilient. When we feel good, we can be calm, we can be patient. When you're in a good place, because maybe you had some coping skills, you could do your taxes and get through them. But basically, when we can be resilient, when we have positive behavior, we are able to access the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain where positive behavior and resilience and emotional regulation live. What happens though is that when we're in some sort of Yuck, some sort of discomfort, our brain senses discomfort as a threat. So it turns on our fight or flight response. And that's where you see these big reactions, or even the reactions that aren't so big, but are turned in. What you see when someone's in Yuck is their lack of resilience. The behaviors you see are unhealthy coping mechanisms. They have a lot of Yuck, they're in fight or flight, and they're just not coping in a healthy way. There are 3 types of Yuck behaviors, 3 clusters of Yuck behaviors that you tend to see. These are usually considered bad behaviors, but all they are is unhealthy coping mechanisms. So when your child is in yuck, maybe you just told them that they can't go to their friend's house because they didn't do their homework, they're in yuck. The first type of yuck behavior you see is yuck turned out. Yuck turned out is where a child may be aggressive. So maybe you say you can't go to your friend's house and they slam the door or they shove things off of a desk. That's an unhealthy coping mechanism. Yes, it's a behavior we don't want to see, but it's also just their yuck is not higher than their skills. Or maybe they're disrespectful and they say, I hate you. Why are you always the worst parent in the world? Maybe they're defiant and they say, nope, not listening to you. Or they blame you and they say, well, why didn't you remind me about your homework, my homework? And chances are you did, but that's their yuck just turned out. Maybe they're trying to control the situation. Remember I said when a child feels out of control, they'll cope in unhealthy ways by trying to negotiate or tell you what to do. This is unhealthy coping. It's a lot of yuck without a lot of healthy coping. Now, I also mentioned that yuck isn't always loud. Yuck may be turned in. Those are the kids, and eventually I will tell you that yuck turned out also becomes yuck turned in. But these are the kids who say mean things about themselves. Maybe they feel bad about themselves. They have anxiety. They are not confident, so they give up. These are examples of unhealthy coping skills that are a little bit more quiet. They're more turned in on themselves rather than turned out on others. And I will tell you there's a third cluster. And I would love for anyone, as I describe this third cluster, you can say what you're seeing. Remember that person you mentioned who has a lot of those emotional needs accounts or low? What do you see in their behavior? Do you see their yuck turned out? Do you see it turned in? Do you see it numbed? So as I describe numbing yuck, I want to know what you see. So yuck numbing is where we are tuning out, basically. So a lot of people tune out using devices. A lot of kids do this, teenagers do this. We do this as adults. We may tune out on sports or the news or just social media we're scrolling. Sugar is another really good yuck number. That's why a lot of people gained weight during COVID. Other risky behaviors, I will tell you, when I was a therapist, almost every adolescent that I saw was smoking marijuana, or not almost every, a lot of them, probably 60% were smoking marijuana. That was their way of numbing yuck. They had a lot of yuck inside and they didn't know how to handle it. So this is what we see is yuck turned out, yuck turned in, yuck numbed. This is the opposite of resilience. People though you have to understand the yuck factor. And then the next thing now, as I get to the solution, is handling discomfort by understanding what I call the yuck curve. It's the last thing I'm going to teach you today, but this is basically how we teach kids to handle discomfort. So you see in front of you a rainbow-shaped curve, and this curve represents what happens when someone is in yuck over time. So you tell your child they can't go to their friend's house, and they get really upset. And what happens is as you maintain your boundary, they get more and more upset, and eventually their upset reaches a peak. That's when their yuck behavior is the worst. And it comes down. So it gets bigger before it gets smaller. That's why when I teach setting effective limits, I always say, when you set a limit, your child's yuck is going to get bigger before it gets smaller. Just expect it. This is what happens with yuck. And what you also need to realize is that when someone's in yuck, or what I call on this curve, you're not going to see positive behavior. When they're on this curve, they're in fight or flight. And once they enter yuck, they're not really going to have positive action until they travel the curve. So what we need to understand is if we want our kids to handle yuck better, we need them to understand this yuck curve, and that when they're in yuck, they're on this curve. I call this the yuck zone. That's where you see unhealthy coping. So what we want to do is teach them, because usually what we do when we're in the yuck zone are those things we regret. We're doing that yuck turned out, we're yelling. And I would say to kids, and it takes a while for them to admit this because admitting they're wrong is vulnerable. So just know that. But I always say, does that really get you the result that you want? This is where we do the things that we regret. So we want to teach them how to recognize yuck and to identify a plan to ride out the yuck curve. We need to actually, once we're in yuck, we need to go through the whole curve to re-access the prefrontal cortex and do something that is effective. So what I teach, again, at a very high level, is what I call a when-then statement. And a when-then statement looks like this. When blank, then I will blank until I can blank. So we're going to start with the when. When I'm frustrated, Then I will. And everyone says, well, what is the then? The then actually depends very much on the child and their temperament. But the key for understanding then is that what brings us out of yuck more quickly is a feeling of safety. Safety makes sense because we're in fight or flight. Safety is what gets us out of yuck so we can reaccess the prefrontal cortex. Now, what makes someone feel safe depends on the person. But what we want them to think is when I'm frustrated or when I'm angry, then I will, and whatever makes them feel safe. It could be that they need to move their body. It could be that they need to distract themselves in their head. It could be that they need to squeeze something really hard. It could be that they need to go to the garage and yell. They may need to release some of that yuck. But ultimately, they need something that helps them feel safe, some sort of soothing behavior that teaches their brain that they're safe. This is what gets them out of fight or flight so they can reaccess that prefrontal cortex. And we do this until they can. And what I usually have kids do is decide ahead of time, in these situations, how do you want things to go? Because when they know ahead of time how they want it to go, they can use their when then statement. When I'm really angry, then I will wrap myself really tight in a blanket until I can speak more respectfully to my parents. Okay, so the last thing I will say about all of this is there are 4 things that this requires. This requires a child to be motivated. This requires a child to know when to use this. This requires a child to know what to use, and it requires practice. So if you're thinking in your head, I've done this all already, it is one of those 4 reasons that it hasn't worked. I just wanted to kind of let you know that. I don't have time to get into all of this, but I wanted to let you know that. All right, so wrapping us up and getting to questions. So I'm about to take them. I assume you know how to submit questions, so start submitting them because I'm about to get there. What I want to do is just give you a very quick summary of what I talked about. Fostering resilience is about shifting from judgment and advice to meeting needs and teaching. Remember, we want to reduce the yuck, increase the skills. We reduce the yuck by making deposits, and we teach the skills by teaching the yuck curve and when then statements. All right, so questions. I'm ready for questions. I will tell you on this slide are a lot of free resources I have. You can find, there's a link there that has a free resource where I talk more about yuck and the yuck curve. If you just want tips from me, you can email this address. That's my team, and they'll send them to you. It's my podcast and my Facebook group. So I'm going to stop talking and just see what questions there are. I think they were going to be told to me.
Oh, yeah, I got them. So here's the first question. What do you do if a child doesn't recognize that they're in yuck?
Yeah, most people don't. So here's what I do. The notice part of it comes either from their body signal. So we can teach kids to recognize my heart is beating faster, my face is getting hotter. A lot of kids struggle with this, but if they know that, that's great. Or we just identify situations where they tend to lose it. So I always say the way you start to notice is, when do you get most mad? When someone tells you no, when your friends are mean to you. So that's where we start the when then process, is either a signal in their body or a situation.
Okay, the next question is, can they get a list of the actions to make deposits?
Yeah, I actually do have a product. I don't have it available to the public, but I can give more examples of deposits. So I mean, because they're inside of my programs, that's really where they are. But let's see, let me give you other examples of deposits. So connection is often one-on-one time can be really helpful. It's a deposit into connection and significance. But a lot of people, and I actually have a podcast episode on like hacks for one-on-one time. But here's another example is for significance, having just a ritual that you only have with that child. Maybe a handshake that you just have with them, or maybe you get up on Saturday mornings and you read a book. So a ritual can be a really good one. A deposit into control, which is what a lot of people know. There are a couple of them really quickly. The language of control. So if you're giving your child or teen a choice, let's say you say, you can do this or you can do this. The language of control is where you say, it's up to you. It's your choice. It doesn't, I want to know what you think. Another way to deposit into control is what I call joint problem solving, where you're actually, once you identify a limit or boundary, you're working with your child to come up with plans and consequences. So those are other examples, but honestly, my list of deposits lives within my programs, if I'm being real.
Thank you. So this
parent said that my kid has social anxiety when we went to an event, for example, a running race. We have previewed the situation with him. We had, they did everything and everything seems fine. But when he gets there, he says, no,
Yeah.
I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
So how can we better encourage him to participate in the activity?
You can't, to be honest. You don't want to encourage. That's one of the advices that we don't want to do. What he actually needs, what happens is he says no, that's a coping mechanism. He needs to be able to calm down his nervous system. So you give him all the advice in the world, but when he gets there, all of that advice goes out the window. So he actually needs more help calming down his nervous system using those soothing strategies. Now, one of the simplest ways you can start this is the advice you gave him, assuming that he chose it. Let's say he's going to this event and he's like, okay, when I'm on the field and I start to get nervous, then I will count backwards from 10. I'm totally making that up, but let's say that's what he came up with. He actually needs to do that practically in real life. He needs to go somewhere. It doesn't have to be to the actual field, but he needs to practice this so his nervous system gets used to it. What's happening again is he has all the ideas, but if he doesn't know how to calm down his nervous system, in that moment, his fight or flight has hijacked the part of the brain where all those ideas live. So you don't just want to encourage him more because he's going to feel bad when he can't do it. You want to say, okay, we need to practice this. We need to help you figure out how to calm yourself down. And I'm someone with anxiety, so I have to do this all the time. We need to teach you how to calm yourself down so that in reality, the advice you know is supposed to work can actually work. So it's so counterintuitive, I know it.
Okay, another question. We know that electronics like mobile games or cartoons are not good for hyperactive children. But how can we stop them from these activities and point them into a better choice?
Okay, love that one. And what I will say is, yes, kids, especially if they have a need for stimulation, will be drawn to those games. But what you need to know is that this is not a choice. And I talk about this, I think I have a podcast episode on this. They're not choosing consciously to go to the video game. What's happening is they need a certain level of stimulation. That's a need. It's not a want, it's a need. Their brains get used to a certain amount of stimulation, just like we get used to a certain amount of caffeine. And if we don't have it, there's a withdrawal. So they need a certain amount of stimulation. So their brain is going to say, that's the only thing that's going to make me feel better. So it's not an active choice that they're making. They're literally, it's as if a child were hungry and you're saying they're choosing to go eat that food. Well, I guess it's a choice, but they're also meeting their need. So what do we do about this? I actually have workshops on screens and what we do. And basically what you're going to need to do is set a boundary or a limit of when they have to be off of screens. I usually suggest doing screen off time rather than screen on time. And they are going to have withdrawals and they're going to have a lot of yuck. It's real. They're really withdrawing from the stimulation and the dopamine hits that they were getting. And you're going to have to handle that amount of yuck. Eventually their brain can rewire so that something else feels good. But for the first little while, 2, 3, 4 weeks, nothing else is going to feel as good. Just like when you're getting off of caffeine, nothing feels as good for a little while. So you're just going to have to realize that it's important to set boundaries. Their yuck is going to get bigger before it gets smaller. And it's really important to approach them, not as if they're making a bad choice or having an immature reaction. They're actually struggling. So remember, we're moving from judgment to, oh, their yuck is bigger than their skills. That's all that's happening right now. So I hope that helps.
So thank you, Rachel, for speaking today. If anyone is interested in contacting Rachel, please see her contact information on this slide. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.